Friday the 23rd of January, 7:15 UK time in the evening, and Davos has finished. And Trump was there, and Trump gave it to them, and so did Scott Bessent and Lutnick and the rest of the American team, and we're going to be talking about that now with Tom Luongo. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for making yourself available.
As always, Rich, it's my pleasure and my honor to be here, my friend, and I hope you're staying at least reasonably safe in
Yes.
fascist England.
Yes. My
England,
pleasure.
the UK.
My pleasure, my honor, and thank you so much. And everybody who's watching, please subscribe, comment, like. It helps the algorithm and it helps the channel grow. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom, I'll have all your links in the description below. So, Tom, did you know there was an event in Davos with the World Economic Forum, and they're doing it for our own good to make life better for us?
There was something like that. These people, they were in Davos.
Yeah.
Why would they go to Davos? I just find it right. Honestly, Rich, I think it's really funny when I watch all these people and they use the phrase Davos now, and I literally watch like guys like Scott Bessent and others use the phrase the Davos crowd. I'm like, you and I have been together long enough, right? We've been doing this long enough. Do you remember the first time I used that freaking phrase?
Yeah.
And I had that whole like meme. And I don't care. I just love the fact that, when you speak the truth propagates. That's what that's about. It's not about me or my ego or anything else. Like, what matters is that when you speak the truth, people respond to it, and then it self-propagates.
Yes. Well, that's the point I was going to make, right? Which is why conversations like what you and I have, and Alex Krainer and Susan Kokinder at Promethean Action and the others on this channel and those that come on your podcast are so important because those conversations filter into the zeitgeist, including the American system of political economy, including Trump's war against globalism, including the nefarious role that the City of London still plays. So what did you make of Trump and his team?
I thought that, it's funny. I've got a line coming up in this month's newsletter. I was writing the editorial literally this morning, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, watching them roll into Davos, Switzerland, like Patton's Third Army rolled across Europe. That's basically what they did. He took 300 people with him to Davos. Okay. It's not like he came in and did the thing with, he gives a speech and then he leaves and maybe a couple other people are on the edges. Like last year, Jamie Dimon was there along with him, like everyone's been like, no. This year he brought the entire economic team, Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent, who's been off the charts, like hilarious, funny. I don't want to move around very much because my ribs hurt. I've been laughing so hard at everything that comes out of that guy's mouth. I think I've pulled at least one rib, about his comments, especially about Gavin Newsom, Jameson Greer, the trade negotiator, the trade ambassador, and Lutnick and Rubio, and I think Rubio's there. I'm sure he's there, like negotiating stuff behind the scenes, and then the rest of the entourage to explain to everybody, this is over. We own this place now. What I thought was really interesting, it wasn't just Trump's speech. Well, Trump's speech was interesting, if for no other reason than because he walked in and he wasn't the Donald Trump that everybody was expecting. Now, you and I, we've talked about this before, and I kept saying, what do you expect from Trump at Davos? Well, I expect him to bring an entire, the whole tray worth of bags of flaming poop, and then he was going to, with Stephen Miller, and he was going to like pull the shotgun out and blow it all over the audience. Well, he did that, but he did it without ever raising his voice. He did it without any histrionics. He did it without any, he just walked up there. He, you could tell that, when he was talking, when he was, following the Stephen Miller speech on the teleprompter, and then he would stop and he'd become Donald Trump for a little bit. But he never raised his voice. He only showed a little bit of anger. Just a little bit when he was said, and we've been getting screwed by you people, right? And that was your telling moment. Like that was the moment when the mask slipped and he was like, yeah, I'm really angry with you people, with what you've done, not just to the American people, but really to the world.
Yeah.
And that is all ending now. And it is over. And no matter how much you try and talk through this, we have all of the answers for you. You are wrong and you are done. it wasn't just Trump that I thought was really interesting. The most interesting thing I saw out of the entirety of Davos this week, as much as I enjoyed watching them all take a victory lap, like they've entered Berlin and like the end of World War III was just declared. It was that Larry Fink gave the surrender speech. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock and now co-chair of the World Economic Forum, for all intents and purposes said the institutions have failed. We have lost trust of everybody in the world, and we need to get that trust back. But how do you think you're going to get that trust back, Larry? You're going to implement everything that Trump wants to get done. You're going to change the focus of the conversation at the WEF into this. And that's what that signaled to me. You're going to push this. He's literally saying we have to push our rhetoric. We have to push our thinking in this new direction. Because if we don't, no one's going to listen to us anymore, and we're not going to matter. So that tells me a couple of things. It tells me, one, what I've been saying for a long, long time. I remember about 4 years ago, the first time I ever went to speak in public. I was asked to go speak in public at a small investor conference. I was in Miami. And we got done with the day, and I did my speech and did my Q&A afterwards. And then we're all having drinks out on the veranda of the hotel, 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, on smoking cigars, drinking rye, doing the thing, right? Basically, I'm sitting there, and I'm like, at one point, I just said, this is when I was first starting to really look at BlackRock and think about it. And I remember at that point, I had just started thinking in these terms about BlackRock, and I did a quick perusal of their balance sheet and the financials and everything else. And I said, for all this BlackRock is taking over the world nonsense that everybody's, is screaming about, I'm like, I looked at BlackRock and I went, but this is a really small company. Like they have 40 billion at the time. They have $40 billion worth of shareholder equity. They bring in they're mid cap at best in terms of like revenue and market cap and everything else. They control they have outsized tentacles relative to their power because they control all of our money, right? All of our invested funds, all of our pension funds and everything else are invested in their ETFs and their funds, right? And so BlackRock get to appoint members of the board as our proxies on all these companies that now we hate. Disney and InBev and all these companies that they've all run afoul of populist forces over the last 4 or 5 years, doing all this DEI and woke nonsense, which that was all the directive was coming directly from Larry Fink, who was putting these people on boards, while he was working with these globalists like Soros and others. But at the end of the day, it's not a very big company. So what I sat there this was the first time I ever I've given this version of the speech before. I want to remind everybody of this. And I sat there with the group of high net worth investors who had asked me to come speak. And I said, I'm sitting there with a cigar in my hand, a double rye in the other. And I'm like, okay, guys, I'm Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan. You're John Solomon of Goldman. You're the guy who runs, you're Brian Moynihan of BofA. You're the guy at Wells. I don't know his name. You're the guy who runs David, whatever his name is, that runs Morgan Stanley. I'm like, this Fink guy, he really thinks he runs the world, doesn't he? And but I looked at the balance sheet. These people it's a $40 billion company. We could take that over tomorrow. We could call Jerome up over at the Fed and literally destroy this company and take it over in no time flat. I get half because I'm JP Morgan, and you guys split up the rest the way you want. I don't give a shit, but let's get this done and let's get this guy off our ass, because this is not conducive to us having a long-term plan. Because what I was thinking in terms of the American banks saying explicitly, we are not going to move to CBDCs and have these technocrats, these bloodless technocrats in Europe take away our primary business. Because that's what CBDCs really imply, that we no longer have the two-tier transmission system from, the central bank to the commercial banks. The commercial banks then lend the money to the people. They're just going to take the people and put them into accounts at the central bank. No need for commercial banks anymore. What do we need commercial banks for, right? And so I'm thinking to myself, no way Wall Street's going to go along with this. But how do you deal with the problem? And how do you deal with the fact that this guy wields this immense amount of power by proxy? your proxy, meaning you and me.
Mm.
Like if I'm Jamie Dimon, I'm like, I'm not down with that. And this is why I went on the whole strategic thinking about SOFR versus LIBOR and all the things that I talked about. And so here we are 4 or 5 years later, almost 4.5 years later now, thinking about this, and I'm like, it all kind of played out because Fink was being, groomed, and it was part of that whole cabal to implement the WEF's ideas about how we were going to move forward in this world. And it was all part, the EU bloodless technocrats and, rule by regulation and rule by carbon credits and social credit scores and all of this stuff. And if they want to implement all that stuff, still, they're more than welcome to do so. The leadership in Europe, the Ursula von der Satins and, the Keir Stalins and all the rest of them, that's fine. If they want to do that, they're more than welcome to do so. And that was the message that the Americans put forth all week at Davos. And then Fink said, by the way, us doing that, we've lost the trust of the world. And so we're no longer intellectual thought leaders. We're no longer, the think tank trying to, guide humanity to the next, next set of institutions that are going to, help us achieve our goals as a species, which is what they nominally were doing. He's like, we can't do it that way anymore. Like the sovereigntists have won. And that tells me two things. It tells me, one, that thinks that everything that's been implemented over the last 4 or 5 years has done immense damage to the infrastructure, the fundamentals of BlackRock's business, right, as a company. And if they want to be a going concern into the future, they better play ball with whatever's coming out of the United States. And that in order for Fink to have accepted this role as the co-chair of the WEF, oh, by the way, it's okay. You can go with us and craft the peace deal over Ukraine because this is his gig. Like they're not going to cut Fink out completely. This is the part that a lot of people really need to get them to wrap their heads around. Trump is going to negotiate with bad people. He's done it with Netanyahu. He's done it with, al-Jalani in Syria. He's done it with the Qataris. He's done it with all these people. At the end of the day, you got to get buy-in from all these people, right? So in order to, practically remake the world. But you're not going to give Fink everything like FDR did to Stalin, giving him all of Eastern Europe after World War II, right? But you give him a peace so that he can stay relevant, right? Because you don't want to make enemies of these people. You want to get them to stop doing what they're doing and shift 90 degrees. And the best way to do that is to bring all these people in, give them a gib, and then, here you get to make this amount of money and no more. It's in effect, it's very similar to the way Putin took over Russia when he brought all the oligarchs in and said, look, this is the way it's going to work. You get to keep all the money you've stolen. You get to keep all the shares you've stolen. I'm not going to take that away from you, but you're going to stay out of politics and you're going to let me run Russia. And those of you who don't get along, who don't go on board with that, you're going to get the horns. You're going to get the spurs. And that's what happened to Khodorkovsky. And that's what happened. That's why Yukos was nationalized. That's why Khodorkovsky had, went to jail, all of that. And it's effectively the same thing that Trump, I think, has done to Fink and BlackRock and the WEF. And I think that's the big takeaway. All the rest of it is just, us enjoying watching Big Gay Patton take, Gavin Newsom to the cleaners and all that. I don't know about you guys, but I can't. I just can't get enough of that. I can watch that all day long, like on infinite repeat.
Oh, the stuff you said about Gavin Newsom is so funny. But moving on to the European leaders, that incredibly powerful, serious triumvirate of Starmer, Macron, and Merz, the real rulers of the world. Right.
Well, that's and again. So you're right. I'm glad you brought up Frederick Merz, right? Because Frederick Merz, he's a BlackRock guy. He was put in power by Davos to run Germany, and even he surrendered.
Yeah, he said, for people who don't know, he said that European Union has been too big on regulations and
It's
not
failed.
enough on innovation and on
Mhm.
generating business, and we need to cut that. And also, I think Germany's now reviving some coal power plants, and I think
Well,
he said that it was a mistake to get rid of their nuclear power stations.
he did.
Yeah,
He
which is a
said all that.
complete turnaround.
Right.
And then
That's been coming for about a year. I mean, honestly, there's been noises coming out of Germany about that for about a year now. But the big one is that Merz basically said, "Yeah, I'm throwing in the towel."
yeah,
And when you realize that Merz is a BlackRock guy, that is so that undergirds or supports the argument that Fink has surrendered, and now his lieutenants have surrendered.
and Macron left before Trump arrived,
Well, of course,
and Keir Starlin didn't even turn up.
right? He's not even important.
Oh, what
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that?
The WEF Davos this year was the American show. It, it was. This is like I don't know. Like this is it wasn't as boring as C-SPAN here as in the United States, but it was pretty. It was pretty good. I mean, like Trump shows up with an entourage of 300 people watching Jameson Greer. I don't know if you watched the
I
panel
haven't
he
seen
did.
that one. No.
Whoa, that was phenomenal.
What was he saying?
Well, he just kind of went over the whole Hamiltonian American system of production and everything else. He did 30 minutes worth of prepared remarks, but then it was the 35 minutes or 30 minutes of Q&A and the kind of grilling he got from the bloodless technocrat, that woman that was handling all the Q&As, and it was just awful. And he was just like, no, that's not the way this is going to work. And it was just like, no, we're going to do this, this, and this. And you're wrong about inflation. One of the things that the points that he really made, which was great. He said, look, you all want to, you want to make a point about tariffs are inflationary. Well, they're only inflationary in things that you import. And what we're saying is that we're doing away with this idea that of the interdependence of trade. If you think about, let's back up for a second. What Davos and the British system, I'm going to be generous for a second. I know this is. I'm going to be generous to the EU leaders for a second. Let's be generous. I don't agree. I don't think that's the way these people are. But let's be generous to them and say that their idea of globalized interdependent trade was designed to preclude future wars, right? That the idea being that if if everybody relies on Belgium or the Netherlands, whatever that, and for ultra high lithography, ultra high definition lithography, and everybody has to get those machines from the Dutch. That means that China is dependent upon the Dutch, and if Taiwan is the sole producer of all the bleeding edge chips, and everybody's dependent on China, and this, that, and so there's a means by which to create interdependence that would preclude war. It's much the same argument about, hey, if pipeline, I've always said that like pipelines are the seams that stitch countries together in trade, right? That if you Germany are dependent upon Russian gas, you're not going to go to war with Russia because you're dependent upon them for gas. So, but that model has obviously failed. But even if we are generous in our thinking or of their um, intentions for creating that system, right? That if we do all this, it'll preclude future wars. But it doesn't. That's not what actually invariably happens. But even if that's the thing, that's not what we wound up with. What we wound up with is a world of perpetual war and perpetual using those single points of failure around the world as flashpoints for global conflict for rapacious psychopaths that are in power to then use that as a means by which to subjugate someone else. Okay? That's the way these things were used. They weren't used to preclude war. They were used as war by other means. Okay? And so it wasn't the velvet glove with a normal fist. It was absolutely the iron fist with the veneer, the velvet glove over top of it, or even better, this virtue signaling about it. the system never changed because underneath the system was always a colonial one of extraction and taking more out than came in. So what Jameson Greer was saying was like, look, if I understand that you guys are still thinking like this, that if we have globalized trade this way, that it will tend towards peace, but it doesn't.
No.
So therefore, we should all be dependent upon or not dependent upon the very things that make us a community, a nation. We should be self-sufficient in things like food and military and pharmaceuticals for the most part, not completely, but we should be able to take care of the very basics as countries, as communities that are that we need to survive, and that where we can then, and then as consumer goods, sure, like let me put it to you this way. This is like one of the ones that I like to pull out because it's one of Dexter White's favorites, which is that I would love Iran to become part of the global economy again because I want access to Iranian pistachios because Iranian pistachios are better than everybody else's pistachios, and I want to be able to buy them. Right? It's just like I want to be able to buy, French cheeses or French wines because they're better than everybody else's. I want to be able, and that's what we should be trading, right, amongst ourselves. And if we have to put up protection tariffs around those things, but if they're better, then we'll pay the money, and then the governments can self-fund, and then we don't have to extract money out of our people directly through income taxes and bond sales and all those other shit. We can just run our governments that way. The governments don't have to necessarily, put up these high walls, and we don't have to normalize tax policy. We don't have to do any of that stuff, which is what all these institutions argue for. The OECD argues for tax harmonization. They refuse to just call it, hey, everybody just needs to be, everybody just needs to be a slave to the OECD's ideas about what best practices are for national tax policy. That's every country is different, and every country is at a different stage of development, and let them figure out what works best for them. And so we don't need parents managing our trade and our finances and and our national health care and all the rest of it. We don't need to worry about all that. You go. If you're worried that the people in Somalia aren't hygienic enough to stop the reoccurrence of the bubonic plague, well then maybe you should trade with them honestly, so that they can build up their economy and they can build up their local community to the point where they you can teach them how to build water treatment plants, and not you'll build the water treatment plants, take all the friggin' profits off the water treatment plant and tax them in perpetuity. No. They're going to build it. You're going to get a dividend off of that. Work with them as partners, not as protectorates.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental flaw in their thinking, because they're, of course, aristocrats who believe in some way that they have the right to make these decisions for other people because everybody else is just an ignorant savage. And that goes back to the statements of people like Joseph Borrell, the former foreign minister of the EU, who, called the EU the garden and the rest of the world the jungle.
Yes. Well, he hadn't listened to the video that I did with EM and Blaine a few days ago, where EM said the European Union is a 5 times divorced woman who's looking for another sugar daddy to maintain her lifestyle, and nobody wants her because she's a has-been.
That's EM's interpretation of it, which is as extreme as one can get. I can be a little bit nicer about it and say, I don't get me wrong. It's not that I disagree with EM about that. But it's that, how about this? Is really what they want is they just want alimony on the way out the door. And, if we were to offer them alimony as Americans, they would be okay with this. This is why they want to be paid an exorbitant amount of money for Greenland. For example, I thought the thing by Putin, the calculation about Greenland that Putin put out saying, well, back in 1867, the Russians sold Alaska to America for this amount of money. In inflation-adjusted dollars, Greenland's probably worth about this much, which is less than what Trump had put on the table to pay the friggin' population of Greenland to overthrow, to get rid of the King of Denmark. You know what I mean? It was hilarious, but it also did two things, and this is the funny part about this. which is because Putin's very savvy this way. He never like says exactly what he means, but he always gets his point across to anybody who's willing to listen, especially in terms of statecraft. So, of course, what he was saying is, why did the Americans? It begs the question: why did the Americans buy Alaska back in 1867? Why were they negotiating for it for 30 years up until that point? Why did eventually the Tsar sell it to the United States for so little money? That's because they didn't want it to fall into the hands of the British. And it's the same thing. The same thing with Greenland. They've been after Greenland. We've been after Greenland since before the what you guys know as the U.S. Civil War, and we here in the South like to call the recent unpleasantness. Which is a line I'll never get tired of, even though I don't even agree with it anymore. Right?
Okay,
but it's just fun.
So on Greenland, because you said, I think it was the Bitcoin podcast, which I listened to, great podcast, where you said that the reason the United States wanted Greenland is for listening posts, so that because what the globalists are going to do is stoke up a civil war in the United States, and they're going to use the northern trade route to bring in supplies and stuff. And I was listening, and I thought, well, why do it that way? Why can't they just bring them through I don't know, by shipping to Toronto or something? I don't know if Toronto's a harbor.
Well,
or fly them in.
These are just smuggling routes. Like, you have to realize that the northern sea routes like that, there's nothing up there. So if you want to move stuff around without anybody knowing it, like, we can see that stuff. Right. We can see, like, remember, go back to Blaine and EM's analysis of the oil tankers riding too high in the water because they're not actually transporting oil. Right? If we don't have, and again, ask yourself the question: what I'm saying, if what you think I'm saying doesn't make any sense, then ask yourself, why did the Europeans lose their ever left minds about this?
Yeah,
because the reaction itself is the tell.
Yeah,
is if it wasn't important, if they haven't been blocking us wanting to have, listening stations and radar stations and whatnot on, all over those northern sea routes, they would have given them to us 30 years ago during the height of the Cold War, or 40 years ago during the height of the Cold War, and they didn't do it then either. So ask yourself the question: why were they doing it? What was so important? Again, so much about geopolitical analysis is not what you think you know about these things, but you gauge the reaction when you poke an unexamined area of the planet, an unexamined area of geopolitics, and Trump goes over and he pokes at it.
He does.
He says, and he goes, and what he's doing is he's looking for a reaction. Once he sees the reaction, that's how you know in a negotiation how important that thing is to somebody and what their pain point is on it. He does it on purpose. This is the way he negotiates. He wrote an entire book about it that everybody says they've read, but nobody's actually read.
He's a master, absolute master. And I've heard it said that when he meets with people, he's very, very gracious, but he also is able to work out their weaknesses and their vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. So then what you're talking about sounds to me like he's doing that on a much larger, grand scale.
Yeah.
And yes, of course. Do you know, Tom, I'm so grateful to you and Alex and all the others, because I am learning about geopolitics and stuff and how it all works. And the plays.
Again, but we're all learning in real time as well, Rich. Don't sell yourself short. You have to realize that it's the conversation itself that, as we, as I chat with Alex or chat with EM or chat with you or chat with Wayne, all these people over the years, or I just watch things play out over time, you're like, oh, that's why he did that. And it doesn't occur to me the minute I see it for the first time. I remember when he first brought up the Gulf of America, I was like, okay, really? I mean, it's cute, it's funny, it's whatever. No, it's important, because what it did was it poked a reaction. Why is it the Gulf of Mexico? Why are we talking about it in those terms? Who decided that it was the Gulf of Mexico and not the Gulf of America? It doesn't make any sense, right? Why does somebody else get to name it? We're the dominant power in North America. We should get to name it, right? And then you watch the histrionics and the reaction to it, and you're like, maybe it's because it was a very important point. It may be a subtle point, but you start with renaming a body of water. But then you start going, but I also want the Panama Canal. I also want Greenland. I also want to stabilize Venezuela. I also want to kick the communists out of Cuba, blah, 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 blah. And then you start to the 51st state stuff. And he did all of that all at once to find out, where everybody's position was on this and to expose what, again, go back to this thin veneer of the velvet glove, right? Use that as your model. It's a thin veneer of civility masking a very, very, very deep-seated hatred and seething, despising of America by all of these people. We found this out about the average Canadian, who all of a sudden, the minute he used the word 51st state, and every middle-class Torontonian just lost his mind and decided that China was a better trade partner than the United States.
Yes.
Okay. What are you talking about? And so, yeah, was Trump a little insulting? Sure. Do you always go from zero to Aida the minute you are marginally, when one of your friends marginally insults you? If I did that, I would have had to dude, my best friend in the world refuses to accept the fact that I actually wear pants. Okay. He makes fun of this on a regular basis. It's a running joke with us. He takes the piss out of me every third day. Okay. If I was such a pussy that I couldn't handle that, then we shouldn't be friends.
Yes.
And that means that US and Canada have never been friends. That's the point. But most Canadians and most Americans, I don't say most Canadians, but a lot of Canadians, especially the Western Canadians, and a lot of Americans never gave the US-Canadian relationship a second thought. And when we go to rewatch the South Park movie, and US goes to war with Canada over a Terrence and Phillip movie, that's supposed to be funny. And it is funny, but it's not. It's funny because the best comedy is truth and pain.
Yes, absolutely. Tom, I'm going to have all the links in the description below. You and I are going to be talking again about, I think, silver and gold and stuff. So people should be finding out about what. Subscribe, comment, and like. And look forward to speaking to you soon. All the best. Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.